I've been a lover of sports my entire life, and ever since I was a little kid, all I ever wanted to be was a professional athlete. I was really good in high school and received a scholarship to play football in college as well, and I went on to have a good college football career actually, but nothing near what it would actually take to get to that next NFL level. I was able to make a little money after college doing commercials for local businesses and doing some autograph signings, but that quickly faded away and I moved on to life after sports. I've had a pretty successful career as a working professional, but my biggest accomplishment and the pride of my life has to be my family. My beautiful wife and our amazing daughter. My daughter has taught me how to be a better person, and I love her more than anything else in this world. And I'm sure if some of you reading this are parents, you can relate to those sentiments. About 2 years ago, I was invited back to the small town where I played college football for an event surrounding the completion of their new facilities on campus. They were going to do a tour, a dinner, and obviously some drinks and snacks in between. They invited alumni, sponsors, and some higher-end boosters to try and get everyone together to network and, more obviously, to fundraise, as I'm sure the new facilities were not cheap. I really didn't feel like going, but my daughter seemed interested in taking a trip with me, so I figured that we'd go and make a little daddy-daughter date and have some fun and head out of there early. Once I arrived, though, I wondered if I had made a mistake. The last thing I felt like doing was schmoozing with all the boosters and talking about the good old glory days. I prepared myself for having the same conversation about a dozen times, but since I had my daughter with me, I figured most of my attention would be devoted to her, and I wouldn't have to really entertain a lot of other conversations, at least for a long period of time. There was one person I didn't recognize who seemed to keep giving me a bit of a side eye or looking at me like he seemed annoyed that I was even there. Every time I caught him staring, I would look over in his direction and he would immediately look away. As I made my way around the room, I felt like this person was kind of shadowing me, always staying a fair distance away, but every time I looked up, it felt like I could see them, which I hadn't noticed with any other person at the event. I was so busy that I eventually shook it off and made sure my daughter was having enough to eat and drink and that she was having a good time. And as soon as she got bored, I was going to head out of there and just take her home. She really enjoyed our tour of the new facilities and even got to see the mascot and take a picture with them. We got some free swag, which she really enjoyed as well. It was well worth attending to see the consistent smile across her face. And my daughter and I were sitting at a two-person high-top table, and the dean pulled me aside for a conversation. I got up from the seat, grabbed my daughter's hand, and told her that I was going to be right there, and that I was just standing up to talk to a few people. My daughter was still directly to my left, so I could see her while I was having a conversation and shaking some hands, and the dean introduces me to the new head football coach, and we make some small talk and share a few laughs. I'm making sure to every few moments look back at my daughter, who is playing with a team-branded fidget spinner, and I entertained the conversation what felt like another 30 to 45 seconds and said, "Well, I'm going to get back to my daughter and see if she wants to hit up the dessert table with me." And as I go to sit back down, I realize my daughter isn't there. My stomach immediately hits my throat as I dart up on my toes to see if I could see if she walked away or maybe she's hiding under the table. I saw her walking about 50 feet in front of me down the hallway, exiting the main room and heading towards the new facilities or the exit. And she's too far away for me to see who she is with, but it's clear that she's with another man. I yell out to her and beeline through the crowded areas, barging through people and yelling my daughter's name. It makes quite a bit of commotion, and I can hear people begin to get quiet to see what's going on. I catch up to her and pick her up and ask her what she's doing and if she's okay, but she's still smiling and as happy as can be. And my attention immediately turns to the well-dressed guy who is seemingly escorting my daughter somewhere. Seeing his face, I realized this was the same guy who had been staring in my direction all night. I ask him what the hell he was doing with my daughter and contemplate knocking his teeth in before he even gets a chance to answer. He gives me some weak answers, and to be honest, as shocking as it is, I don't remember exactly what he said. I just remember saying that I'm calling the cops. Apparently this guy was some big donor to the school and was known by most of the people there. And before the police arrived, I absolutely ripped into the dean asking him what type of people they allowed to donate to the school. I don't think I could have done anything more to show my disappointment and outrage. All the while I was trying to do all of this without making my daughter upset. The guy must have weaseled his way out of the room when a lot of the commotion was going on, because I didn't see him again after that. I did make sure that I talked to the police and that all his information was provided to them, as a lot of people at the event knew who he was. I got out of there shortly after and took my daughter for some ice cream, letting her know that nothing was her fault, but that in new places she should always stay with me and never walk away, especially with people she doesn't know. I don't know whatever came from the incident. I don't know if any laws were broken, and I don't know what excuse he actually gave. I would assume, and I hope that this matter would have been taken seriously, but once I got back to my home, many towns over, I never heard anything back from the authorities or asked for any additional information or statements. Looking back, I'm just glad my daughter was safe and that I was able to step in before anything terrible happened. It just goes to show you that no matter how diligent you are, you need to be even better to protect your children. When I was in high school, I loved the game of basketball, and I was one of those kids from the late 2000 era when ball was life. I knew I was not good enough to play at the next level, but it didn't stop me from playing the game I loved when I was back in high school, and I played with the same group of guys for years. And by the time we became seniors, our team was making a run for the playoffs, and it was a very exciting time and the whole community was buzzing around it. And after a very massive win, our team was only one win away from a sectional title, which was just about the greatest accomplishment I could have ever made in high school. And the sectional game was 6 days away from our last win, and our coach did something a little unorthodox. He set up a scrimmage for us so we could stay in game shape. And for anyone who doesn't know, setting up a scrimmage this close to a big game is kind of a recipe for disaster. As a coach, you're risking your players' durability and potentially opening them up to an unnecessary injury. As players, we didn't really care, though. We wanted to play as much as we could. We were high on winning, and any chance to improve our game, we wanted that. And the main reason our coach set up this scrimmage was to really test our skills and start to push us to the limit. The team we were set up to play was a team made up of players from all over the state. They didn't belong to one school, and these were essentially the best players in the area. It was going to be a test for us. If we were able to hang with this team on the court, we could be more than ready to compete in the sectional game. The game was on a Thursday evening after school, and we played the game at a neutral location. And the gym was nice, but the surrounding area had seen better days. It was one of those sort of rundown parts of the city. One of the downfalls of the gym was that it only had one locker room, which the other team used. And my team was forced to change in the basement, and basketball season is in the winter for anybody who doesn't know, so let's just say that the basement of this building was absolutely freezing. Not only was it freezing in the basement, but it was very dark. Even with all the lights on, it felt kind of dim. Something about the basement was just off, though. It was creepy down there, and not just because it was a dark basement. From the moment I got down there, I was joking around with the team that this basement felt off and was weird, and most of the guys just kind of laughed it off and called me paranoid, which I'll be the first to admit, I am kind of a paranoid person by nature, listening to podcasts like Let's Read. And while we were in the locker room before the game, we were all joking around, just being typical high school idiots. I continued to press my teammates about something just not being right about this place. And one of my teammates was using his cell phone to shine a light in the dark corners of the basement, but it just looked like junk and boxes everywhere. This was 2009, so the flashlight on the phone wasn't as powerful as it is today. And eventually the coach joined us, and once we got focused on the game, I forgot all about that creepy basement. And after the game, which we lost by the way, we went back into the locker room to discuss plays and talk about what went right and what went wrong in the game. After our coach gave the final speech, he left the locker room with the other two assistant coaches, and my team got dressed and continued to talk about the game. And one by one, the players started to filter out of the locker room until it was just me and another player. And just as we were finishing up, we heard a loud crash come from the back of the room. It was a loud and very jarring sound that caused us both to freeze in our tracks, and as soon as I heard that loud crash, that horrible feeling about the creepy basement started to come back. My buddy asked me if we should go investigate, which I was completely against, and I didn't want to scream like some coward, so I just sort of went with him. Now this time it wasn't paranoia. As he shined the weak cell phone light into the back corner of that basement, standing as still as a statue, was a man. A man I would say was maybe in his 30s at the time. He looked very disheveled, and he looked angry. And my friend and I both just stopped and sort of stared at the man, and all three of us now just stood completely still. These few seconds felt like the longest stretch of time I had ever experienced, and just as my friend tried to say something, the man just started to scream. It wasn't even words. It was this weird growl of a scream, and we both decided to run. Whatever was happening, we didn't want to find out the result of the screaming. As we sprinted towards the stairs, this man ran after us, and he was fast enough that he was able to grab my hand and yank me down to the ground. Fortunately for me, he fell on the ground in the process of pulling me down, and with the momentum I had from both of us falling, I was actually able to bounce back up pretty quickly and continue running out of the basement screaming. My friend and I ran into the parking lot screaming our heads off, and the rest of the team and the coaches were waiting outside. I couldn't speak, but somehow my buddy was able to concisely explain to the coaches what had just happened to both of us in the basement. One of the assistant coaches stayed outside with us and the rest of the team and called the police, while the head coach and the other assistant coach ran inside to confront this man. I still have no idea why they did this. I'm sure in the heat of the moment they probably felt compelled to defend us, I guess. And a few minutes passed and the police showed up and ran into the building. It was the first time in my life that I had ever seen the police spring into action like that. We were all freaking out because during that time the coaches never came back outside. A minute or two after the police ran into the building, the two coaches finally emerged. The assistant coach had his arm around the head coach, who was holding his arm as if something had happened to it. From our vantage point, we couldn't really see exactly what was happening. The only thing we could see for sure was that the coach had what looked like blood all over the front of his shirt. And not long after the two coaches had come out, the police came outside with that man handcuffed. It didn't seem like he was struggling or resisting at all. I do remember that he had this sort of wicked smile on his face as he just sort of stared blankly ahead of him. And that's where the nightmare ended on that specific evening. Now, it wasn't until years later when I ran into my old coach at this fundraising event that he finally told me what happened. And he told me that he and the other coach ran into that basement shouting. They thought that we made it up at first because they didn't see anyone down there. And while we were standing near the stairs, the man jumped out and cut the coach's forearm with some type of switchblade or something. The coach thought that it could have been a box cutter. Right after he got cut, the other coach tackled the man to the ground and basically detained him by sitting on him until the police showed up. The coach had to get stitches in that arm and all types of blood tests because they didn't know if the blade was actually clean. Thankfully, he was fine. And it was arguably the scariest part of the story was that nobody knew anything about this guy. He seemed to have no identification and he was clearly not right in the head. And the area that I live in, unfortunately, has always had issues with people with drug issues, and as far as my old coach knows, this poor man was just another unfortunate soul whose mind was lost on the streets. And if it wasn't for my assistant coach, my head coach might not have been alive to tell that story, and that's something that still freaks me out today. I remember when I was a kid, I would watch and even attend some football games with my dad, and it was something that we bonded over. When he passed away when I was in the 10th grade, I stopped watching football though. It just didn't appeal to me like it did when I would watch it with my father. And a few years ago, I fell in love with the game all over again. Now for some context, I was 27 years old when I started following football again. I would watch the games with one of my best friends and his wife, and Sunday nights became a tradition at his house. Good food, good friends, good times. Falling in love with the game again started to bring back so many fond memories that I had with my dad. I know a lot of people out there may not enjoy sports, especially American football, but sometimes the memories you can make can go far beyond the game itself. However, the memories are not always good. And this story that I'm about to tell you happened last year, and instead of a fond memory, I was left with a very lasting nightmare. As I mentioned a moment ago, I got back into football a few years back, but I wasn't able to attend a game until last year. My buddy surprised me on my birthday with tickets to an NFL game, and I was beyond pumped. This was going to be the first game I attended since before 10th grade. My town unfortunately doesn't have an NFL team, and the closest stadium is almost 3 hours away. I didn't want to drive all the way home after the game, so I decided to actually book an Airbnb close to the stadium. My friend who got me the ticket was also attending the game with me, and he was bringing his wife as well. They didn't want to stay after the game, so they planned on driving home after. And this was honestly fine with me. I was actually looking forward to the quiet evening to myself. The game was awesome, other than one minor hiccup towards the end, and the score was tied in the fourth quarter, and our team actually had the ball. And a crazy series of plays transpired, and as you might expect, the crowd was going insane. So insane that someone actually bumped into me and caused me to spill some of my beer onto the gentleman in front of me. And he wasn't pleased. And I apologized, but he continued to lay out this very verbal assault. After a minute or two of getting yelled at, the man went back to watching the game, as did I. Not long after the game ended and our team came out victorious, and we cheered and celebrated with the rest of the home team fans. I won't say what the team was for my anonymity, and that night I got back to my Airbnb and just kind of hung out and relaxed. I decided to order myself a pizza and just sort of enjoy my little scenic getaway. The place was very cozy and on the outskirts of that town, and it wasn't like in the middle of nowhere or anything like that, but it definitely felt kind of secluded. I'm not exactly sure what time I fell asleep, but it was late. After midnight for sure, and at some point during the night, I woke up because I thought that I could hear this very strange noise. I sat in bed for a minute trying to focus, and I didn't know if it was just my imagination or if I actually had heard something. A few seconds later, I heard it again, and then again right after. This wasn't creaking floorboards or any of the other things that people say when they think you're being paranoid. This was without a doubt the sound of something being thrown at the side of the house, something small, almost like a rock or a pebble. I got out of bed and turned most of the lights on, mainly because I was a little spooked, but also because I didn't know the layout of the house and I didn't want to stumble my way through the darkness. I'm a bit clumsy and I have a knack for breaking things, and I made my way to the window that was on the other side of the house. And that's where I had heard the sound coming from. I cupped my hands and looked into the darkness, but I didn't see anything, and I was convinced that whatever I had heard was probably nothing, and being the anxious person that I am, I just decided to go investigate outside. I understand this may seem like the worst idea in the world looking back, but I had convinced myself that nothing was out there except maybe some wildlife, and I just wanted to make sure. I spent a few minutes outside, walking around, having a smoke, and I didn't see anything weird or out of the ordinary. I did see a few small rocks on the side of the house where I had thought I had heard the sound, but it was a pretty wooded area, and those small rocks could have just been there the entire time. I decided to chalk up this entire ordeal to just my anxiety and nerves and being away from home. I started making my way back to the house, and that's when I froze. Because I had turned a lot of the lights on, I was able to see inside the house from outside. And there, walking through the kitchen, was a person. Someone who was wearing a hood. I was able to see them through the room clear as can be, and I immediately took cover behind a tree, ducking down. Thankfully, I had my cell phone with me, and immediately I called 911. While I waited for the cops to show up, I just sort of watched this figure through the windows slowly creeping through the house. He seemed to be opening doors and even checking closets. I had my small duffel bag on a little table in the kitchen, and this person went through my bag. He even grabbed my wallet and went through it a bit, but didn't even take anything. After a couple of minutes, this person started to move a little faster. He was whipping open doors, and he looked like he was looking for something, and he looked frustrated. He must have heard the police because as soon as the cop car showed up, he jumps out a window and starts to flee into the dark. I came out from behind the tree and flagged down a cop and tried telling him that the intruder had just ran, but they were very focused on calming me down in that moment. Finally, the police were able to take my statement, but by that time, this intruder was long gone. To my knowledge, they never caught this person, and nobody knew what he was doing or who he was looking for. The owners of the house were alerted by the authorities, and they claimed that they had no idea why anyone would do that, and I believe them. I remember telling my buddy the story that next morning, and he believed that it might have actually been that disgruntled fan from the football game, the one that I spilled beer on. I think it would be outrageous and borderline improbable for an intruder to have followed me all the way home, but the more I thought about it, this person did fit the profile of that crazy fan. He was even wearing the same color as the team, but that might have been common for the area as well. And this all could have easily been a coincidence, but I don't know. It really made me think. And it's really scary that sometimes people out there can just do things like this, and we truly will never know why. I played volleyball all the way through middle and high school and didn't want to give it up just because high school was over. And I ended up joining an adult league after high school and played whenever I could. When I was 21 years old, I blew out my knee and I was more devastated by the fact that I couldn't play volleyball for a whole year. By the time I was 22, I realized that I had lost a lot of burst from my knee injury, and I decided to try one of those over 21-year-old adult leagues. I was never a fan of them because they seemed like it was more about drinking, but I decided that I was ready to start a new chapter of my life. I can honestly say that I loved it. It was a weird adjustment at first, but before long, I was all about it. I made so many friends, and that became my life for the next 10 years. Last year was the last time I played, and I think that I need to take this year off. And this is the first year I'm not playing since I started the 21 and over league. And let me tell you about what happened last year, and you can tell me if you think I'm overreacting. It was the first or second game of the season, and we played a team of 3 girls and a guy. It was a co-ed league. The game started like most games. It was fun and competitive and had just the right amount of trash talk to keep those things interesting. At one point during the game, my teammates set the ball for me and I attempted to spike it over the net. I was met in the air by the man on the other team who lightly tapped it back over onto my side. The play caught me off guard and we lost the point. Once it was dead ball, the man came over to me and told me that it was a great attempt and better luck next time. He was handsome and he flashed his pearly white teeth at me. I laughed and we joked about it for a few minutes and I felt like we were kind of vibing, but I think he was just a nice guy and I was overthinking things. And we finally went our separate ways after the game and he asked if he could buy me a drink, but I declined. He then told me and my friends that we could join his team in the bar to hang out again, but again, we declined. Not because we were sketched out or anything. This all felt very normal and nice. We were just covered in sand and wanted to be done for the night. My friends and I talked in the parking lot for a few minutes and eventually we all said our goodbyes. I was standing outside my trunk putting my bag away and getting ready to leave when I heard someone clear their throat loudly behind me, like the type of noise you make when you want to get someone's attention. I turned around and standing behind me was a small blonde woman, and I recognized her right away. It was one of the players from the team we just played. She wasn't saying anything at first and she was just kind of looking at me, and I asked if I could help her with something and she just continued to stare at me. I ended up just saying whatever and got into my car and drove off. And that was weird. I looked into the mirror once and the woman still seemed to be just creepily staring at me. It wasn't objectively scary or anything, but it was very creepy. And that night I got a bunch of phone calls from a restricted number. I answered a few times, but it ended up just being breathing. And I also got some DMs on Facebook from a clearly made-up profile that started calling me some pretty offensive things. I was annoyed, but just ignored my phone for the rest of the evening. And this went on for a few days, but then stopped completely on the 4th day. I figured whoever had a problem with me was over it by now. The next week came and so did our volleyball game, and after the game, we decided to hang out for a little while before calling it a night. Inside the bar, I saw the handsome man from the previous week. He said hi to me and I simply waved back, and that's when I noticed the blonde woman standing behind him, and I started to put together some pieces. He's probably dating that woman and she's jealous. Well, I didn't want to be some homewrecker, so after my little wave, I just pretended like I didn't see him. And the rest of the night, I could feel her staring daggers at me from across the room. It was uncomfortable and I just wanted to leave, and so eventually I did. Those restricted calls came back that evening, but I just turned off my phone. And nothing happened all week until it was time for volleyball once again. The night was like all the others, except I did feel a little anxious. I didn't want to see that handsome guy again and then just be weirdly stalked by this strange blonde woman, and I was doing my best to focus on just the game, which was going good for the moment. And at some point during the game, I heard someone yell behind me, "Watch out." And I turned around and saw a volleyball fly by my head. And before I could see what was happening, that small blonde woman ran from the side with a bottle and smashed me over the head, screaming at the top of her lungs. I felt the bottle crack my head, and I vaguely remember trying to get myself into sort of a fetal position so this woman couldn't cut me or anything with that now broken bottle. To me, this all felt like slow motion, but it was only about 10 seconds. Two of my teammates grabbed this woman and held her down as she tried to whack me again with this broken bottle, which would have done some major damage. She wasn't saying words either, just screaming like a banshee. The cops arrived after they subdued her and arrested the woman. I was being looked at by the EMT, probably going to need stitches, when that man came over and apologized for her behavior. And he went on to tell me that she was not his girlfriend and never had been. She was a friend of one of the girls on his team, and she apparently was obsessed with him. He had to tell her several times that they weren't together because she kept telling people that they actually were dating, and she even made a joint Facebook account for the both of them, even though there weren't any pictures of them. I'm not sure why they kept this woman on their team, but it was clear to me that her marbles were messed up from the very beginning. And I'm lucky I left that altercation with just a minor laceration because it could have been much worse. Anyway, I'm done with volleyball for now. I don't want to show up to that bar one day and take a shot to the head from a bottle, and I hope that woman found the help that she needs, because you can tell by just looking into her eyes, she was not well. When I was 18 years old, I went on my first major trip alone without my family. While I wasn't completely alone, I was with my friends Mike and Stan. It was 2013 and we made the voyage to a small town on the outskirts of New Jersey for WrestleMania. And let me first say that the three of us are huge wrestling nerds and still text about it to this day, even though we all live in different states. Back in 2013, this was going to be the greatest weekend of our lives. For those that don't know, WrestleMania is kind of like the Super Bowl for wrestling fans, and this event was going to be at MetLife Stadium, which is where the New York Giants and Jets usually play. The main show was on Sunday, but the entire weekend was filled with special events. The hotel that we were staying at offered a free shuttle service anywhere within 10 miles, which was pretty amazing, and we planned on taking the shuttle on Saturday into town to do some of the activities. Stan got the address of one of the venues, and we gave it to the man who provided the shuttle service. There was a clear language barrier, but after a little bit of back and forth, we figured out where we needed to go. The man dropped us off, and we got out of the shuttle like three excited idiots. We didn't even look where this man dropped us off. And once all three of us were out of the shuttle, we realized that we were clearly not in the correct location. We were in a sort of rundown and sketchy part of town, it seemed like. Everything looked abandoned, almost condemned. Stan called the hotel and told them that we needed a pickup, but the lady on the phone told him that it was going to be a little while because the shuttle service was already on another call. We begged her and told her that he literally just left less than a minute ago, but she didn't seem to care. And us being younger, we didn't really fight it and just sort of accepted that we were basically stranded in this sort of almost abandoned part of town. We wanted to get mad at Stan for giving the driver the wrong address, but we honestly didn't know if it was our fault or his. And we put the address into the GPS of where we needed to go, and it was about a 10-minute drive from our current location, so we didn't want to walk it. And this was also before Uber was a very big thing, so we couldn't just easily Uber ourselves. And being young and naive teenagers, we decided to walk around this sort of beat-up area. It was scary and unsettling just being in this area, and we saw people living on the street who were pretty messed up on something. It was scary, but truthfully, it was just kind of sad, and while we were blissfully walking along, Mike noticed that someone had been kind of following us for a few minutes. He told us that classic line of, "Don't look now, but it looks like someone's kind of tailing us here." Stan didn't care, but me and Mike started to feel a little uneasy. We started to move a little faster and noticed that the person following us was matching our speed, though, and it was obvious now that whoever this person was, they were on our tail. It wasn't long until we broke out into a straight-up sprint, and to none of our surprise, this person actually began to run after us. Mike and Stan were both great athletes and were able to create some distance from the guy, and I, on the other hand, am a horrible athlete, and the man was closing in on me pretty fast. I didn't know what to do, so I decided to stop and step up to the man, and that was a horrible mistake. This guy didn't stop when I did, and he just barreled into me, knocking me to the ground. Now, while I was down, with no warning or threat, he buried an elbow into my eye with a lot of force. He hit me so hard that everything just went black for just a second, and while I was down, the man grabbed my wallet and ran back from the way he came. Mike and Stan ran back and helped me up. They called the cops, who showed up but didn't do anything. They told me that this area is very bad and people get mugged all the time. The likelihood of me getting my wallet back is slim to none. I was defeated and heartbroken and just wanted to get back to the hotel. Stan and Mike were shaken up as well, and they decided that we'll just hang out at the hotel and watch basketball or something and get ourselves excited about the big show on Sunday. They told me not to worry about the wallet until after the show, and then they would help me replace my ID and figure everything out. The cop I reported the mugging to was at least kind enough to drive us back to the hotel. I really did try and forget about that mugging, but I just couldn't get the guy's face out of my mind. Not to mention my face felt like it was smashed with a shovel. That night, all three of us were woken up by the sound of a very loud bang. As I jumped out of bed, I saw the single worst thing I could ever imagine. It was someone trying to open our hotel room. They had the door ajar, but thankfully I locked the latch so this intruder couldn't get inside completely. I ran to the door in an attempt to slam it shut, and in the brief moment before shutting the door, I saw someone on the other side. I screamed, telling Mike to call the police. Stan tried to be some hero and unlocked the door to chase after this intruder, but by the time Stan got to the hallway, all he saw was the door to the stairs slamming shut. While we waited for the cops, we were trying to figure out what had just happened, and then it dawned on me. Someone might have stole my wallet, and inside the wallet maybe there was a room key, which not only had the name of the hotel, but also a little piece of paper with the room number on it. I don't know. The cops came, and we all just reported the incident to the hotel, which was able to move me and my friends to another part of the hotel. And I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I remember looking out the window at one point in the middle of the night, and I saw a man walking around the parking lot. I called the hotel lobby because, being young and stupid, I was scared to call the police a third time. And by the time I got off the phone, this guy was gone, and I never saw him again. We did get to the show on Sunday, but I couldn't enjoy it. Every person I saw with a dark coat made me freeze up, and when we got home on Monday, Stan and Mike helped me to pay for a new ID and even lent me some money until I got back on my feet. Somewhere out there in the world, some guy has my wallet, and even thinking about it now makes me cringe. I'm just happy that I remembered to latch the hotel room door that night. Maybe it wasn't related, maybe it was someone completely different, in which case, that might have been the worst night of my entire life. The story I'm sharing with you today took place around 10 years ago. I've always been a huge sports fan, from watching my favorite teams or playing sports throughout high school and into college. As a summer job during college, I became an umpire for a softball rec league. Baseball was always my best sport, so I figured my game knowledge would transfer easily to umpiring, and from what I remember, I think I had to take a brief course to be qualified to ump, but there were no other qualifications other than experience within the sport and maybe a high school diploma or something. The league was desperate for help, so I was brought on right away. And this story takes place literally while I was umping my first game. Everything seemed to be going well. I shook off the first game jitters and was settling in. The game itself was back and forth, and we hadn't gotten any arguments or comments from players or fans. Fast forward to the final out of the game, and there is a close play on a catch in the short outfield, and I immediately called out. Now, from my angle, it looked like the ball was trapped in the glove and caught for an out. I was pretty sure that I got a great look at it, which is why I made the call. And at the same time, the head umpire called safe and waved his arms saying that there was no catch. And both teams are yelling and looking for clarification, so the head umpire comes up to me to discuss it. Again, this is the last out of the game, and the head umpire says that he had the best angle and that we're going to have to stick with his call. Being my first game, who was I to argue? So I just let him make the final call. He then told me that I should get out of there quickly because people were probably going to be upset and that he would try to take some of the heat off if needed. We clarified the call and stuck with safe, which allows a winning run to score, and the team that had the call reversed was beside themselves. They were screaming, jumping up and down, and rushing onto the field. I immediately head to my car and get out of there as fast as I possibly can. I don't really know what happened, but remember some of the things being shouted at me as I made my way to my car. Now, I'm a very anxious person already in my daily life. It's something I've tried to deal with and also been medicated for. I couldn't stop dwelling on the game and how upset the people were, and as hard as I tried, wasn't able to shake it out of my mind. It was consuming my every thought, and I couldn't focus on anything else. I knew the best things were allowing time to pass and distracting my brain with something else. I decided to try and run some errands to preoccupy my mind and distract myself. I grabbed some groceries and snacks at my first stop, and as I got back to my car, I could barely get into my driver's side door. The truck parked next to me was so close that there was barely any room for me to get in. It was a black truck with some rust, and it had one of those stickers of the cartoon character peeing on a sports team logo. The dashboard was also a mess, and I mumbled something under my breath as I tried to get into the car since I was already in a bad mood. Next stop, Barnes & Noble to grab a few books since it was close to the grocery store. Looking around the store did help temporarily get my mind off of things, and I grabbed a few books that were on sale that I figured I could start later that night. Now, for some reason, though, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As I was reading the synopsis and walking through the aisles, I had this uneasy, tense feeling, but agreed that it was my anxiety taking over and manifesting itself into different forms. I walked back to my car, got in, and as I got ready to leave, I saw that same black truck was parked across from me in the parking lot. Weird, I thought, but no one was in the car, so I chalked it up to just simple coincidence. I grabbed some food, just wanting to get home and curl up on the couch and watch a movie. I got home, closed the blinds, put my phone on the other side of the couch, and turned on the movie Clue and just started eating. About 15 minutes into the movie, I heard a loud noise. It sounded like a car door, but the sound was so loud that it sounded like the door fell off the damn car. 5 minutes later, I heard the same noise. Annoyed, I got up to look out of the blinds, and there was a truck parked directly across the street on the curb in front of my driveway. I rolled my eyes thinking well, I guess I'm not going back out tonight, so I don't have to worry about backing out of the driveway. I headed into the kitchen to get more food and felt like I heard it might be raining outside. I didn't think there was supposed to be any rain. I thought that was kind of weird, and then the rain turned into hail, and it sounded like it was smacking off of my roof. I looked out the back sliding glass door, and the motion light turns on, and I see no rain, and the noise also stops. I headed to the front door, opened it, and saw that a person was standing at the truck aiming something at my house. I immediately slammed the door shut and ducked for cover. I called the police and let them know what was going on. They stayed on the phone with me for a while, but it seemed like it was silent outside. Then I heard someone yelling outside my house, but I couldn't make out what was being said. I screamed out that the cops are on the way and then heard the man say something about being lucky. I look out the window and the truck door slams and starts to peel off. I immediately turned my cell phone to video and actually was able to grab an image of this guy's license plate. I tripped over myself trying to run to the door after the car had started and began moving. I zoom in as much as I can on the back of the truck as it screeches down the street, and I run back inside the house waiting for the cops to arrive and try to rewatch this video to see if I can actually get the plate. As I'm playing back the video, I notice the same sticker that I saw on the black truck from earlier that day, and my heart felt like it skipped or momentarily stopped. I don't know if I was having palpitations or a shot of adrenaline in my system. It all clicked that it was someone following me around from the game earlier. Some deranged lunatics took adult sports way too seriously. I couldn't believe that's why they were following me and why they were screaming and shooting outside of my house. I was able to figure out the license plate, or at least what I thought was an accurate license plate in the video. The police arrived shortly after, and I filled them in on all that was transpiring and what I thought happened and gave them a vehicle description and also a copy of the video. They had to calm me down a few times as my anxiety was causing me to stutter and shake. They were extremely nice and seemed like they took that threat seriously. The cops did an inventory of the damage to the house and came back to me and said that thankfully it looked like it was only paintballs and maybe a pellet or a BB gun as well. There was paint, but it also looked like some small indentations on the siding that would have been made by a BB gun or something similar to it. It made me feel better, a little bit, that someone wasn't shooting an actual gun at my house, but it still took me a very long time to get over the incident. I never heard anything back from the police, which I thought was surprising, but I'm honestly glad that I never have to deal with the person or that interaction ever again. After it happened, I just wanted to forget and not have to deal with that person or an escalation of the incident ever again, and I never officiated any other game. These days, I just stick to pick-up baseball or open gym nights with my friends. I'd be interested if anyone else has had any crazy experiences with a fan or player from an adult league. Feel free to reply to the story below and let me know what happened to you. There really isn't an atmosphere like a college sports game. The student section alone usually makes the ticket worth the price of admission. Even people who don't like sports know how contagious it can be to be a part of that atmosphere. Unfortunately, there's always a downside. Some people can't control their emotions and let the game become more important than it needs to be. And let me tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago, and I'm only realizing recently just how dangerous it was. And I guess all things considered, I'm lucky to be alive. It was a college basketball game, and like always, the home crowd was amazing. It was loud in the arena before the game even started, and it was impossible not to get swept up in the emotion of the crowd. I had decent seats for this game, and the section I was sitting in was filled with mostly fans of the home team. And before the game started, I struck up sort of a casual conversation with the guy in front of me. He seemed like a good dude from just our short conversation. It turned out he was one of the few guys in the section who was cheering for the other team, and we laughed about it and had some friendly debates before the tip-off of the game. And once the game started, we gave each other a sort of fist bump and tuned in. The game was late into the season, so the outcome kind of had a lot of weight on the remainder of the season. It didn't take long for the crowd to start getting borderline hostile to the other team and the referees. I admit, I was caught in the heat of the moment and I started to chant along with the crowd. I swear, sports crowds are sometimes like a mob mentality. You just want to jump right in with your pitchfork. And shortly before halftime, I could tell my new buddy from earlier was starting to get kind of irate. He was getting loud and throwing his hands up, complaining about every call that didn't favor his team. I could feel the legitimate anger in his voice. and there was a specific call right before halftime started that caused the whole arena to erupt with cheer, and as a result, my new buddy threw his hat on the ground. I know what I did next was wrong, but like I said, I was caught in the heat of the moment, and I put my arm on his shoulder and said something like, "Sorry, dude. Maybe we'll get better calls in the second half." I definitely said it with sort of an arrogant attitude. He violently shifted his entire body to get my arm off his shoulder, and he screamed, "Shut up! Get your hands off of me!" I was more surprised than anything else, but just sort of laughed it off and headed to the concourse to grab another drink. I got my drink quickly, and on my way back to my seat, I ran into a couple of my old friends. I stopped for a little while and caught up with my friend before the beginning of the second half. While I was standing in the concourse, my new buddy bumped into me aggressively and said in a clearly ironic voice, "Oh, I'm sorry about that, buddy. Maybe next time I'll see where I'm walking." I was annoyed, but just ignored him. I could smell the alcohol in his breath, and I just assumed he was drunk. My friends laughed and were confused by the weird interaction, but I just shrugged it off and told my friends it was just some salty drunk guy. And the rest of the game went much like the first half. My new friend would get angry and say some passive-aggressive comment, and the only difference from before is that this time, I was just completely ignoring him. I could tell that this guy wasn't right, and I didn't want to enrage him or make him angrier than he already was. After the game, I was walking to my car, and you'll never guess who came up behind me and continued to try and verbally spar with me. That's right, the guy from earlier. And I ignored him all the way to my truck, which wasn't easy. Imagine a big burly guy yelling at you at the top of his lungs in a packed parking lot. And I bet you would struggle to ignore him as well. And when I got to my truck, I finally turned around and told the guy to get away from me. He started to laugh and just stood there as I got into my truck and started to drive away. I thought this annoying ordeal was over when I finally got home that night, and it took me 40 minutes to get out of the parking lot traffic. And so between the drunk fan and the traffic, I was all done and just wanted to unwind on the couch and watch a movie. Before I knew it, I had watched 2 of the Batman movies and realized that it was after 2 in the morning. I wasn't tired for some reason, so I decided that I was going to put on the 3rd film in the trilogy. Only a few minutes into the movie, I saw these bright headlights shine in through my window several times. I lived on a pretty quiet street. It was rare to see headlights at even 7 at night, and it was extremely rare to see them at 2 in the morning, but not impossible. But then I saw them again a few minutes later, and then a few minutes after that, and something felt wrong. After the 3rd time, I decided to glance out of the window, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Someone was out there, looking into the windows of my truck, which was parked across the street from my house. None of the houses on the street had a driveway, so the residents just parked in the road. I could see the person trying to open my truck door, but thank God it was locked. And once he gave up on the truck door, I saw him looking around, and that's when I noticed his face. It was that dude from the basketball game. And I was even in more shock now. And I grabbed my phone and called 911, and while I was on the phone, I saw the man making his way to the house directly across the street from my own, the house where my truck was parked in front of. It was clear that the man was trying to break into the house. He must have thought that the house across the street was my own, and that's what I told the dispatch woman. And I could see from my living room window that he was ramming his shoulder into the door trying to get it open. What I find most disturbing now, and didn't realize was that big of a deal back then, was that he clearly had some kind of weapon in the back of his waistband, something I'm sure in his wacky state of mind he wanted to use on me. Thankfully, the police showed up quickly, and thankfully they arrested him before he successfully broke into the house of my neighbor across the street. When the cops were taking him away, it was clear that this man was belligerently drunk, and honestly, in my opinion, he may have been under the influence of something else as well. When he finally sobered up, this guy had no memory of the game or the horrible events that followed. I have no idea what horrors this man had intended for me. And even more terrifying is that this man didn't even know what horrors he had planned. And it's scary to ponder what his intentions were in his messed up state. I also have no idea how he found my house. I guess the true horror here is just how a seemingly normal and nice individual can turn into a literal demon. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. I'd love to see you there. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my email at LetsReadSubmissions@gmail.com, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, don't forget to wash your butt with soap.